Hello.
Hi, Michael.
Hi. So I will be able to screen share, it looks like.
Yes,
Okay.
you can.
Where are you located, Ines?
I didn't hear, sorry, I didn't catch.
I said, where are you located? Where you
I'm from Turkey.
is that where you're
I live in Turkey.
broadcasting from?
Where?
Are you broadcasting from there today?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Michael.
Hey, Scott, I was getting nervous.
Yeah, I've been having problems with the Blue Jeans interface. I encountered it also in my workshop a bit too. I thought I had a troubleshot, but um, anyhow, I'm here, and I
All
hope
right.
I don't lose the window like I've had in the past. Let me try
How'd your
this again.
workshop go?
I felt it went really well. I'll talk to you about it later. Some lots of learning on my end, and even some resources I can share back with you if you're interested. But for now, I
Sure.
just wanted to make sure that we're all set to go with Mentimeter.
We are.
Okay, great.
I'm ready to pull it up.
Good. I just wanted to check, and I will mention that when I introduce folks.
Hello, Michael.
Hello.
How are you? It's Bert.
Hey, Bert, I see you. You look like
How
you're
are
in
you
a
doing?
tropical environment.
Well, it's a virtual screen, but it's where I was on Saturday. Barolo vines in the north of Italy. I used the
Oh, nice.
metaphor of the Donizetti's opera Elixir of Love for theories of change. Sometimes useful, but not always. Fine.
Right. Well, it's good to see you.
Likewise, this conference gets a bit early for you, doesn't it?
Oh, not too early. It's uh, almost 8 o'clock here.
Yep. Your workshop went well?
I did. I had a good group. Enjoyed it.
That's good. Technology worked okay?
Yes. Um, it went very well.
Well, I'm not surprised, but that's good to hear. You should be keeping busier than ever.
Uh, Quite a bit. The the opportunities to work on these things are ever growing, and that's part of what this session is about.
I'm looking forward to see what comes up.
I'm putting in a link to the Mentimeter we're going to start off with.
Good. Well, I'll let you concentrate.
Thank you.
Catch up
Good to
later.
talk to you. Appreciated your email.
Pardon?
I said I appreciated your email to me about the article.
Oh, no. It's sort of thought inspiring, so that's what you want something to be.
Yeah.
So,
So good morning, everyone. Good morning, Beth. Hello.
hello?
Hello,
Hello.
everybody. Hi, hi.
Hi,
Um,
Mike.
Hey, Serge.
Yeah, good morning. I
There's
say,
Eric. Hello, how are you?
I'm good, Beth. I'm good. Long time, eh? Happy to see you again.
Yeah, I know. Where are you right now?
Good, great. I'm speaking from Ottawa in Canada. Hi, you are. Good morning.
Good morning, good morning.
Good morning,
Yes.
Scott.
good morning.
I'm I'm
What
struggling with
how's your
Okay.
blue.
weekend?
I'm
Just gonna,
struggling with blue jeans. I don't
yeah.
think I have ever used blue jeans before.
Yeah, me too. Good morning, Zenda.
Checking whether there's a
Good to
Good
see you,
morning.
Zenda.
You can
So
hear me,
we're
right?
getting on.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Oh,
we're getting
Zenda.
to the hour. So let me just do some taking care of business stuff first. First off, as you has experiencing, and I have as well, blue jeans can be a little finicky. I've gave a professional development workshop over the past few days, and one of the problems sometimes is that the window can disappear from your screen. And if that happens, the best troubleshoot for that is to exit and just re-enter Blue Jeans, which I just had to do the last 5 minutes. So I'm not going to touch my Blue Jeans window again. Um, I think Joe has indicated that she's here. She's just going to need a few minutes to prepare to speak. And I am seeing we got about 27 people on board right now. So I'll talk for a couple more minutes stalling before we officially start, because it usually takes a bit of time for people to log on and such. And Michael has shared in chat, if you can make your chat visible by clicking the icon for chat, a Mentimeter link that we're going to be using later, and a code that goes with it, it looks like. So you might want to set that up now by accessing that webpage for Mentimeter for the activities that we're going to be doing with that.
A Mentimeter and I lost the blue jeans. Where the bloody hell is that? Idea where we are now. Here, okay.
So while people are coming here, you will see in chat a link to Mentimeter, which will take you to a web page where you can enter in a code, and that will bring you to a question that you can contemplate and write an answer to. You just simply type in the word and then submit your answer. And we'll be taking a look at that shortly later on in the introduction to the panel.
You kindly read out the code so I don't have to toggle
Sure.
between.
The code is 2135-4344.
Okay, thank you. The other obvious question we have is that how do we share our screen? I have lost totally.
Sure. If you look at the top of your windows for BlueJeans, at least in mine, there are 4 icons. One's the video camera, the other one's the mic, so that's how you can show yourself. You might need to move your mouse to the top of the window because they sometimes disappear automatically. So one's the video camera, the other one's the mic, and we ask that people keep themselves muted unless they're talking. And the other one just looks like a screen, and if you put your mouse over it, it says share screen. So you can click that when it's your turn to share a screen, and then when it's your turn to not share screen, you can do the same thing. And be careful not to click.
Can I just try my slides, or are we already in session?
We're in session, but we haven't started yet. We're going to start right now. Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to try if my sharing slides work, but it's okay. Sorry. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I think without further ado, it seems like people are getting here. So let's get started. Let me just get back to my talking notes. Give me a second. And great. So as I just said earlier, well, first of all, let me thank everybody for joining us, for attending the session, whether it's live right now or later on watching the recording. And I'd also like to thank the EES for the foresight in hosting a conference with themes like the Anthropocene, its complex problems, and evaluation's role. As I said a bit earlier, you'll notice in the chat that there's a link to Mentimeter, which we'll be using sporadically throughout the hour-and-a-half session to solicit some input from the audience. And we'll be shortly doing that. Well, right now, actually, you can start entering input by clicking that link, and there's a code Also in chat, 2135 4344. You enter that into the web page that the link brings you to, and then from there you can respond to the first question. Okay. All right. So I think I'm going to start things off introducing this panel session. I've prepared some points to raise, and then I'll talk a little bit about who will be speaking next. All right, so I would, in regards to complex problems, which is part of the theme of this strand at the EES, I consider the climate crisis as a meta driver of problematic change, with a multiplier effect illustrating systems dynamics, exasperating existing problems such as poverty and inequality, and toppling negative social tipping points towards oppression, racism, and other forms of social injustice. The premise of this panel session is straightforward. The urgency of climate change presents an opportunity for action by evaluators on what is arguably the most pressing challenge we face, not just as evaluators, but as inhabitants on the planet. What are we going to do about it? It's timely to note that earlier in this week, an unprecedented joint action was announced. More than 200 health journals worldwide are publishing a statement in the lead up to the UN General Assembly and the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow, calling on leaders to take emergency action on climate change and to protect health. I'll quote a passage. The science is unequivocal. A global increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average and the continued loss of biodiversity risk catastrophic harm to health that will be impossible to reverse. Despite the world's necessary preoccupation with COVID-19, we cannot fail for the pandemic to pass to rapidly reduced emissions. Reflecting on the severity of the moment, this editorial appears in health journals across the world. We are united in recognizing the only fundamental and equitable changes to society will reverse our current trajectory. End of quote. What struck me about this announcement are two things. First, we've come a long way since Bendel published his seminal article in 2018 on deep adaptation to navigate the climate tragedy, in which he criticized the scientific community for failing to convey the gravity of the looming environmental catastrophe and resultant near-term collapse of society to the general public. But the evidence and knowledge is not enough. Despite the recent and devastating report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or warnings such as that from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, who calibrate the doomsday clock to 100 seconds to total annihilation, or statements such as that from the health journals, sufficient political action is not forthcoming. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this, and one big one for me is the very well-funded and orchestrated misinformation campaign by big oil and related money interests. For example, this summer, the think tank Influence Map released a report on hard-to-track data revealing that 25 fossil fuel companies, led by Exxon, put out a series of ads on Facebook viewed 431 million times in 2020 alone, promoting the climate friendliness of the industry, fossil gas as green, the ongoing role for oil and gas in the energy mix, and using misleading content misaligned with the science of climate change from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the International Energy Agency's reports on reaching net zero by 2050. I feel this panel session was initially intended as a sister session with one of the same name delivered last year at the AEA's annual conference. The conference theme last year at the AEA was, how will you shine your light? And I see a lot of dark areas in society like the one I just shared that evaluators can help shine some light on. My second reflection on reading the piece on the health journals coming together with a statement Was the relevance for the evaluation profession to see a diverse body of professionals in the health field coming together to make such a statement? I was reminded of the Prague Declaration on Evaluation for Transformational Change adopted in 2019 at the third International Conference of the International Development Evaluation Association, IDEAS. I see the EES and the themes that I identified this year as another example of the recognition in the evaluation community of the urgency of the times and the need to roll up our sleeves, as Michael Quinn-Patton has said, put skin in the game, or as Andy Rowe has called out, all hands on deck. To contribute to the momentum of the awareness and call action within the field of evaluation, we organized this session and brought together 5 thought leaders, not just in the field of evaluation, but also in their other respective fields that they intersect with in their professional work. This includes Joe Puri, Juha Uitto, Zenda Ofer, Serge Eric, Yatin Dijam, and Michael Quinn-Patton. For the remainder of the session, or the panel, each of the panelists will have 5 minutes to share their screen and speak. If you have any questions for clarification, please put them in chat, and time allowing, the panelists can try to answer them after his or her presentation. Following the presentations from the panelists, we've identified some loose springboard questions to prompt discussion among the panelists. We felt that given the time constraints and having done sessions like this, the ability to monitor and respond to all the individual questions that come through chat doesn't always work. But we're going to encourage people to use chat to share their ideas and questions. And time allowing, panelists will try to respond, as well as other people who are attending right now. But we have planned to use Mentimeter at the beginning and in the middle, at the end, as an opportunity for the audience to provide feedback. Okay, I'll introduce each of the panelists a little bit more in detail when their time comes to present. But for right now, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Quinn-Patton, who's going to help us take a look at what people feel about the first question that we posed in Mentimeter. Michael?
So for those who haven't yet joined Mentimeter, this is what's showing up. What word best captures what you feel is the most important challenge of our time that affects evaluation? Complexity and misinformation are getting a lot of attention. Sustainability, climate change, access, data quality, normativity, crises, de-democratization, uncertainty, breakdowns, digitalization, evidence, urgency. We invite you to continue to enter in. This is a way of capturing our shared perspectives on what's going on. And at this point, it looks like misinformation and complexity are at the core of what people are concerned about. Breakdown being added, and you can continue to enter in things as we go along.
Thank you, Michael. So let me just check in. Joe, are you all set to go and to share your screen?
Yes, I am. Thanks.
Great. So our first speaker will be Joe Puri, who's currently the Director of the Environment, Climate, Gender, Youth, Nutrition, and Social Inclusion Division at IFAD. And she was the previous director of the Independent Evaluation Unit of the Green Climate Fund. I've always loved the way Joe is able to effectively wield and communicate quantitative data for complex problems. And among other things, I do want to mention that last year, the Global Landscape Forum identified Joe as one of the 16 women in its 16 most influential women restoring the Earth. So, Joe, welcome.
Thanks, Scott. After that introduction, it's all downhill. I am going to, so I'm coming from the dark side, as you can imagine. I used to be an evaluation person, and now I've gone over to operations. And so I'm going to try and give you a perspective from that side, hopefully, and still make it relevant to all of you, because clearly one of the key things that we are looking at is legitimacy. And I think it's a useful point for us to sort of reflect as an evaluation community as to how and where we can get legitimacy. And that primarily, from my perspective, is really about ensuring that we are able to use these evaluations in a constructive way. Scott, can you see my slides?
Yes, I can. I had myself on mute. I can see them.
And can you just see my slide, right? Not my
I can see complexity, climate. No, I don't see your notes. I just see your slide.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So so I'm coming from the Strategy and Knowledge Department now of IFAD, right? So there are a couple of things that I'm going to try and address during this very quick session, hoping very much that there'll be time for Q&A, is that my experiments with complexity and evaluation, both of which hark back to the time that I was at the GCF evaluation office, but also are continuing now in my current space at the Strategy and Knowledge Department at IFAD. So as evaluators, it's clear that we need to consider complexity in how we evaluate, or if only to make ourselves legitimate, right? Well, so what makes complexity interesting is a very key attribute that we have in most complex systems, which is emergence. So there are a few other attributes that exist for complex systems, such as heterogeneity. That is, you have different actors, such as networks, that they're all interconnected. But the emergence property is probably the most important, and forgive me for saying that, in terms of understanding the current inability, but also the current challenge for the evaluation community. And here's just, pretty basic understanding of what we mean by emergence. These are, essentially properties that emerge through interactions of smaller parts, where the smaller parts themselves don't show those properties, right? Another word for that is ecological fallacy. Now, Eleanor Ostrom basically showed this in nested social systems, and we've seen this in the human body. We see this in just about every part of the world. Why is this important? I'm going to use the example of climate change to then give you a flavor of a certain piece of work that we did and we continue to do, first with Sadie DaCosta and now with a mathematician at the University of Bristol, to actually break down silos in terms of thinking about complexity, but also how we can bring in additional tools within the evaluation community to think about this. So we're trying this out. Complexity in climate change, like Scott said, climate change, anything is complex, right? Multiple stakeholders, there's secondary effects, there's general equilibrium effects, there's shifting baselines, there's feedback effects throughout everything and anything that you know about linear theories of change, and you have it basically with climate change. You have tipping points, you have discontinuities, you have the challenge of ecological collapse. So all of this is essentially confronting us with the attendant uncertainty that climate change brings. And then we're sitting here as evaluators saying, okay, what can we say that can make evaluation useful in a context which has all of these different attributes? So what did we do? In the first piece of work that I did with Sadie, we did what is primarily a qualitative analysis because we wanted to understand, well, what is the magnitude of this challenge? And we looked at a randomly selected set of projects and initiatives that we used proxy indicators for. We looked at the literature review of complexity in evaluation just so that we could understand, well, what are things that can give us a grasp of this idea of complexity? I'm happy to discuss this, but essentially we looked at a whole lot of attributes in this rubric. We looked at We try to do the number counting because, of course, there's this obsession with things that we can count. But we also looked at a whole lot of qualitative things, quality of theories of change, number of stakeholder groups, number of sectors, what kind of intersections are taking place, what kind of interventions are there, what types of projects are these, mitigation, adaptation, etc. And what it revealed to us was not something that was earth-shaking, but it was still useful as a point that we took off from to then do additional work. In evaluation, it forced us to do some kind of very scathing self-evaluation, that we are not able to capture very important changes. We need a rubric of different methods and more methods, but different methods. Yeah? And we need to think about qualitative, quantitative, but that debate is long past. But we need to think about this idea of a tipping point that, frankly, we haven't been able to deal with. And we also had to confront this idea that there isn't much literature on complexity in evaluation. Within climate change, there's even less. But with that thought, then we branched out in a few different ways. And I want to show you what we did with respect to adaptation. Now, adaptation, all of you know, is pretty complex. And one of the challenges and one of the consequences of the fact that we have not been able to do a good job of creating or conceptualizing as well as measuring adaptation has been translated in very deep ways for the operational world, which is, as a consequence, we are not seeing a lot of investment in adaptation because donors and contributors want to see something tangible that they can attribute to their own investments, which unfortunately adaptation does not have. Taking that challenge on board, we created evidence gap maps. And if you want to talk about evidence gap maps, I'm happy to do it. But the interesting thing about the evidence gap map was that we wanted to look at things that were qualitative, things such as uptake of interventions, such as shocks and resilience, whether programs and investments are affecting shocks and stresses. So remember, we were still being agnostic. So we're not saying whether it's positive or negative, but we just wanted to understand, what do we know? We wanted to look at adaptive capacity. We wanted to look at institutions. Interestingly, when we looked at this evidence base, and there were more than 1,000 pieces of evidence for all of countries over a period of 15 years that we collected, and I'm happy to give you references as well, we found actually the evaluation community is not saying very much in terms of what is good, usable evidence. One, on institutional effectiveness. So, for example, a lot of investments occur in institutions, but we don't know much about what works, what doesn't, for whom, and why. We also don't know very much about the populations that are affected. So vulnerable groups and marginalized groups and groups that we want to include and affect as a consequence of adaptive interventions, we don't know much about what works for them. And we are, as a community, again, we are not able to say much. And last but not least, we found that there's some level of evidence, but still insufficient for decision-making in terms of social impacts. So that was an important sort of penny drop moment. We did one more thing. We tried to say, okay, now that we have some kind of a rubric for evidence, can we see as to how this overlies where most institutions are putting in money, right? So we looked at two big sources of money. One was the Green Climate Fund, because we had access to data, but we also German bilateral funding in the context of adaptation. Again, we created what's called a heat map. So we overlaid the evidence that we had over where's the money going. What did we find? Something that again led us to do a lot of hand-wringing and internal searches, right, amongst ourselves and within our community, which is that in the operational world, in the investment world, most investments are going into places such as institutions, into policy, into infrastructure. But there's a mismatch. There's a mismatch because most evaluations really focus on behavior and social areas. So investments are going into spaces where we don't have evidence, and evidence is going into places where we don't have investments. Clearly, there's a mismatch, and we need to correct that. To end then, Scott, What can evaluators do in the context of complexity and to ensure literacy and use? And I'm just going to put it out there just so that we hopefully can have more of a discussion around this. Here are my takeaways, but obviously they are not the final word, and I'm hoping we can encourage some discussion. First is build some protocols by what we mean by evidence and how we can use this evidence to scale up investments, programs, and projects. Some thoughts. Can we understand the representativeness of our evidence? Where is it taking place? What does it mean for the use of that evidence in other spaces? Yeah. What does it mean to say, well, yes, this result may be systematic or it's very context specific? Can we say that it's replicable or not? Can we, if we are going to use some of the evaluative evidence, which can be backward looking, but if we want to legitimize it, I think one challenge for us is also to say, can we use it for forward-looking decision-making? I think we've got to think about to what extent can we use it for implementation? And I think the key question there is, can we ensure that what has been tried and tested also has sufficient information about implementation conditions that can then be replicated as we go forward? The second is, I think we should look at adoption, or what I call the last mile question, a whole lot more. A lot of international agencies especially have this hubris that they can come in, throw money at it, and essentially walk out. But clearly that doesn't mean that it translates actually into changes for the last mile. Adoption of processes, of investments, of innovations in the last mile. What affects that final beneficiary? And how can we make that better? I think we need to look into that far more. And my last point is really, we've got to think as a community and as institutions to also systematically look at this evidence, because there's a lot of richness across all of us, but we just don't try and learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So if you can de-share your screen, and we're going to move on to our next speaker, who will be Juha. And if you give me a second here, I'm just queuing up my screen on this end. Great. So Juha is the director of the Independent Evaluation Office of the Global Environmental Facility. Among other things, he has also served as the executive coordinator of the UN Evaluation Group, and from 2009 to 2012, and again in 2014. I've always felt a personal affinity with Juha because his academic training, like my own, is geography, and I especially appreciated early on, after the COVID-19 pandemic hit, he was one of the first people that I felt really effectively conveyed the link between COVID-19 and to environmental degradation. So Juha, I see that you have your slides up there, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you. Okay, you're still on mute, so take yourself off mute, please.
Okay, I should have done this
we can hear you now.
Yeah, so now I have to get back to my slides. Sorry about this. I'm not very familiar with blue jeans, like most of us probably aren't. Okay, good morning. It's morning here on the mid-Atlantic seaboard in Washington, D.C. Joe's act is a hard one to follow, but I'll try my best to complement what she has been saying. We do live in turbulent times, both figuratively and literally. The latest assessment by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change should be a final wake-up call to humanity, if one is needed, given all the wildfires, floods, heat waves, and storms that we have lived through this summer and in recent times in general. The COVID-19 pandemic itself is an expression of how humanity is overusing and abusing the natural environment. Environmental health and human health are indeed closely interrelated. And I've been spending some time reflecting on the implications this all has for the profession and practice of evaluation. So I wanted to share some of my ideas, and we've been thinking about this also in the Global Environment Facility evaluations, but I am not using examples here because of the time, but they are based on some of the ideas that we have been testing also. The first thing is really that evaluations must consider both human and natural systems. Ignoring one or the other will not be conducive to achieving durable results. It is essential for evaluators to understand and embrace the environmental dimensions. First of all, it is safe to assume that all interventions, irrespective of their nature or focus, have some environmental impact, which is either positive or negative. But this must be captured in evaluations. We also know that performance and success of any program or project are contingent upon the context in which they operate. And I believe that one size does not fit all, and transferable best practices, as they are called, may not exist. Understanding the local system dynamics as well as system boundaries is essential. It is also important to bear in mind that the geographical boundaries and time horizons of interventions may not coincide with those of the natural systems. So think, for example, about watersheds or pollution flows that don't adhere to political boundaries. So evaluators should consider these factors critically when designing an evaluation and not just take what is in the project document as a given. Many types of interventions are distinctly place-bound, but scale matters, and sustainability is often vertically integrated across geographical scales. And here comes the geographical background that Scott was referring to. What happens at the local scale is often linked to global economic processes. If interventions are to achieve transformational change that is durable, they must be positioned at the correct level. It is not sufficient to address only the visible symptoms, but to get to their root causes. Evaluation, for its part, must ascertain whether interventions have correctly identified the drivers, devised appropriate strategies for dealing with them, and whether they are effectively implemented for good results. While the hope for every intervention is to identify win-win situations for people, the planet, and prosperity, as the SDG slogan goes, this is not always possible. The role of evaluation is to be clear where such positive synergies have been found and what made them possible, but also to help understand the trade-offs when they are needed. Evaluation should always be on the lookout for unintended consequences to the environment, vulnerable groups, women, indigenous peoples, interventions perpetuating existing inequalities in resources or power, and so forth. So, from the above points, I draw the conclusion that evaluations can't continue assessing interventions in isolation. And this is part of the complexity that Joe was talking about. Even if we evaluate a specific project, we need to strive to understand the system in which it operates, the factors that drive unsustainability or promote sustainability, and whether the project addresses them. Given the mess that we are in, we will need truly transformational change, not just incremental improvements to come out of this more or less intact. Evaluation can be part of the transformation by providing evidence and lessons from past successes and failures for future policies, strategies, programs, and projects. And to do this, we must embrace a holistic perspective that encompasses both human and natural systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Juha. Great. I can see we're all back here. Very interesting presentation. I really appreciated your points on getting to the root causes and not just the symptoms, which we can talk about later. Okay, well, next we have queued up Zenda. So Zenda, you can, if you're going to have anything to share on the screen, you can get them ready. Zenda Ofer is an international evaluator from South Africa, currently living in Switzerland, but I consider her a world citizen extraordinaire. Rather than accounting her accomplishments and such, I'll share that I have a professional and personal relationship with Zenda for over 20 years, and her work and passion has been a huge influence on me. For example, it was Zenda that pulled me into my current focus on transformational evaluation. And if you have not visited her website, which is called now Evaluation for Transformation, I highly recommend it. It has an assortment of ideas and resources. And what I really like about it and Zenda overall is these ideas and resources are not just from her, but also other people that she invites on. So without further ado, Zenda? I can't hear you, Zenda. You might be on mute. It's at the top. The controls drop down from the top when you got it.
I thought I don't make that mistake anymore after all this many times. So thank you. Yeah, Scott, I just want to return what you just said, and thank you for the leading role that you are playing in this space at the intersection of evaluation and transformation. I kept in mind that we have 5 minutes, and it was very hard for me to think about something that I would like to transfer to you in 5 minutes, and give examples and so on. So here is just one message, hopefully in 5 minutes without practical examples, but we can discuss that during question time, I trust. My message is simply the following. Good evaluators have a very important skill that is very often undervalued in our competency frameworks, and that is the ability to blend, to integrate. This is not a skill that's very common in many professions. It's usually used in our case in the context of integrating qualitative and quantitative data or designs. But in this era, which is defined by the crises that everybody has referred to up to now, for which we have to find helpful solutions very fast, we have to be much more sophisticated about how we think about change, and hence about our theories of change and even theories of transformation. This will compel us to integrate across multiple boundaries or divides or silos of different kinds if we are to advance our practice quickly enough. Obviously, between geographies, learning across geographies, but we also need to integrate what we understand, know, and experience between sectors, between disciplines, between generations and genders, between stakeholders, between fields of work, between knowledge systems, and between worldviews. Now, in particular, we have to draw from new sources of understanding that we have neglected in the past. Number one, we have to move research and evaluation much more closely together, especially research in the natural, social, and transdisciplinary sciences. And when I look at theories of change that people devise, it's often putting people together in a room, drawing from their experience, but not from documented experience. And in particularly, at this time, we have to try to learn from disciplines that we are not at all used to, relatively untouched, like biomimicry, cybernetics, evolutionary biology, systems biology, and so on, of course, from fractal and complexity science, which is by far the most important at this point. Number two, we need to draw far more from non-Western philosophical traditions, mainly found in indigenous minorities and also in majorities in the global south. And we need to blend these with the best of what has shaped evaluation up to now. At the moment, we recognize indigenous contributions, but they're still at the margins. We see them as for indigenous societies, not for us, helping us to solve and use evaluation in appropriate ways to help solve the transformational change and challenges that we need. They should be very much part of our mainstream thinking. I want to come back to this quickly to say just a little bit more about each of these 2 points. But I want to, if I can get my screen to share, I want to highlight, and let me do that, just why this is important now.
Right at the top where there's that little.
Yeah, I know, I have it.
Yeah.
I put my.
And
Oh dear.
something should jump down that shows 4 icons, and one of them's a screen.
And I don't.
Cursor.
I worry because I don't see that. Allowed to see your screen? Yes.
And then if you're using 2 screens, a little thing will show up that.
I wonder if do you have my presentation, Scott? Maybe you can show it.
Yeah.
Maybe it is this one. Sorry, guys. Just because I'm used to something else. Can you see my screen at all?
Yes, I can.
Should I make it like this?
I think people can see it well now.
Yeah. So I just want, this is just a reminder of why this time is crucial to think about how we conceptualize change. This is something that I developed from many sources of literature in 2016. And it just shows how context and cultures co-evolve to shape societies. We very seldom talk about societal cultures, societal contexts. But evaluators need to engage deeply with them. And most fundamentally is that citizens' cognitions, a way of perceiving, and the underlying assumptions and beliefs that have led to throughout the ages are very fundamental to the differences between societies and why we will continue to be very different when we think about the East, about Africa, about the West, and about indigenous societies. And they shape the values and the symbols that we see in reality. But then on the other side, you can see the many global and local dynamics that influence what we do, how we think, how as a society we evolve over time, and the norms and relations and the laws and the institutions that result. Now, this is something that one can use in various ways to remind ourselves of the interconnectedness of things and the fact that these things interact with one another, and that it is absolutely silly to think that one can isolate what is taking place from culture and context. So for me to stop screen sharing, this is the only slide I have. I just very quickly then want to say that at this time in history that we are, in the Anthropocene, the world operates at high speeds with hyper efficiency across global systems. Our markets, trade, transport, financial systems, our value change, the way we move, technology exchange, all of that is deeply connected, very fast, and very obviously hyper efficient. And COVID did dislocate much of that and disrupt. So we are now shifting to a worldview, and this is thanks to both climate change and COVID, that recognizes the interconnections and interdependencies between the many things that I just had on my slide. And the implication of this is that the complexity science now becomes very fundamental in helping us to understand, together with the societal values that are displayed through the way we think and the societal the way in which the societies develop, The value systems that develop from that become far more important now and prominent in efforts to seek a healthy and regenerative future. So my point is, we have to get away from the reductionist viewpoint, reductionist worldview that has dominated societies and evaluation for the last few hundred years. The notion of domination over nature, a focus on the individual at the cost of society, on the extraction of Earth's resources without giving back. This same mentality, which is largely a Western one, has also given us short-term thinking, portfolios of siloed projects, sector-based policy making, linear theories of change, simplistic assumptions about how change happens, snapshot evaluations instead of getting a sense of trajectories of change. And so the tendency to simplistic assumptions of this worldview ignores key change concepts, such as emergence, which Joe referred to, co-evolution, tipping points, path dependence, and the dispositionality, which is defining societies rather than seeking causality. Power dynamics, politics, incentives to change, all of these play a very important role within this. And this worldview has held us back far too long. We need far more attention to how we can implement these concepts in practice against the technicalities and the politics that often ruin our effectiveness as evaluators. So, final remark. Recent findings from evolutionary biology, cognitive neuroscience, and complexity theory are breaking down barriers that separate different forms of knowledge. They provide us also with what I call first principles. I'll talk about that at another forum. First principles that we need to master if we want to engage with change in a way that serves the time of the Anthropocene. But these disciplines are also affirming profound insights from the world's great wisdom traditions, such as Buddhism, Taoism, and traditional knowledge from indigenous people around the world. In a brilliant new book, Jeremy Lent demonstrates once again that systems thinking and complexity concepts have been part of Chinese philosophy for more than 1,000 years. And research has also shown that even today, their way of cognition is far more attuned to systems and complexity thinking than Western societies. And the same for indigenous societies worldwide. And that is also why development in some of these countries have gone so rapidly, because they have adhered to complexity and systems principles. So modern science is, in other words, affirming long-held philosophy. And that is why we should give these philosophies due respect and question long-held conventions about the narratives that drive what we believe about how change happens. That is another topic. But thinking about the narratives that make us believe that change happens as we think it does is something we really need to question during this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's some chatter in the chat box about having had people had challenges seeing your presentations, and I was able to see it okay. What I suggest is you might want to save it as a JPEG in your drafts folder, and then you can maybe attach it in the chat for people to see. But I warn you, I did that, or at least I was trying to do that for people, and then my computer froze. So I don't have my talking notes anymore. Everything kind of crashed in my background to introduce Serge, Serge Eric. So Serge, what I will say about having Serge Eric here is I know that he is very active in the evaluation community. I've known Serge for several years, and hold on a second. This is just ridiculous. And I know that he was the past president of AFRIA, the African Evaluation Association. And that's when I first heard him speak about indigenous evaluation. And for me, it really connected some strong links to the important role of indigenous evaluation in our current situation now, because and particularly from the African perspective, because I'm not saying this is true for a lot of people, but sometimes people tend to equate indigenous with North America or Australia or New Zealand, and I really felt that he brought that out in the African context strongly. I should say that Serge Eric is also, is it pointed out in a slide, he's the co-chair of Eval Indigenous and the vice president of IDEAS. So without further ado, Serge, I'm really happy that you're here.
Thank you so much, Serge. I hope you are seeing my screen. And let me look at this.
Yes, I can.
Wait. Okay, great. And then thank you so much, Scott, for leading this interesting panel. Just to keep our audience and then also our friends on the key points. Is my screen going on? Is yours or mine? Oh,
I'm sorry,
okay.
Serge, what did you say?
Sorry about that. So just to keep us on the key points and then in the matter of the times, my works over the past year, as you said, was mostly focused on the field works. It means like being in touch with grounded context and grounded culture where we implement our programs. Yes, we have to start by agreeing one thing. We are the one who make things complex. We simply said we are the problem, and also the good thing is we are the solutions. But we could be the solutions if we want to be as the solutions. An example, we set our guidelines, ethics for our works as evaluators. Whatever we are evaluator managers or evaluator specialists or consultants. But to what extent do we follow the guideline we set up in place to guide our evaluations? To what extent do we focus on the evidence, to improve our programs? To what extent we really use evaluation for a social change? An example for most recently, when we was leading an evaluations, that was a country evaluation, multi countries. I arrived in the country, basically in Africa and in Asia. But for the two cases, recipients ministry asked me the same questions. It looked like they was talking the same thing in the meantime. Whatever I spent 1 month in another country before going to another one. The question was, the evaluation just happened now, but we already have our strategy policy for ongoing. We're expecting your evaluation to be there last year. To what extent do you believe that your evaluation is going to provide lesson learned to improve our actual policy? Well, as evaluators, I would just ask you to turn them the questions to say that we didn't keep more space for the evidence. Another area to show that we are the one who don't have keep face or make things complex is the extent to which we apply and respect not a country guideline, because each country is specific, and it simply means that each context is very specific. But to what extent do we focus our interventions to be context specific? And then this also what make it hard to our evaluations. Finally, for this first introduction of my presentations, we pay less time to learn from our past. Learning from what was done, maybe well done, key successes, or also what was not done correctly. We pay less time to look at how we managed to get positive achievement in such a way that we can adapt our interventions and in relationship with the past intervention, past achievement. So this is something very, very relevant. And then most of the time, community asking, we did this thing last year with the grades. Why you guys came now and changed it? So do you bring in some kind of, let's say, less willingness to provide change? And then our evaluation most of the time are not guided by, as you said, actual approach and methodology. We learn less from what is being working for people for which we are developing intervention. We're investing thousands of money, whatever in climate change, agricultural project, whatever in education. But they have existing tool and approach. But we make things complex by simply embrace almost everything in the same box, or exporting one context who work maybe in Asia to Latin America. Secondly, another question someone asked me in my evaluations. Yes, we want to change, right? We want to be the change, we want to see, yes. But everyone wants clean data. But very few people want to clean the data. What does it mean simply? Do we really want to clean maybe not workable policy in place and replace it by the working policy in evaluations? To what extent we are ready to accept what is working such a way that we improve life of people? But this is simply way, and these people ask me to New Zealanders, if you want to work for social transformations, we have to care about existing practice for which people want. So if you're not ready to clean the data, you will never get clean data. And then this was very tangible statement I received as evaluators. We bring me to think about when we plan these sections, Scott and colleagues, to think how do we want to bring in a real social transformation in place for people who are working to, and also be accountable to either our donor or also to from where we are getting money. So these are briefly my key message for our section to call us to think about our readiness, our responsibility to make things simple or to embrace or to train complexity, to address complexity. Sorry about that. So we have to think about that we are the key players to either make things easier. Are you ready to make things easier? This is the question for everyone. Thank you, Scott. This is my small message for our partner this morning.
Thank you. It's a small message, but it's an important message. And if you get a chance to look over at chat, you can see some reactions, but very much appreciated. And lastly, I am happy to be able to introduce Michael Quinn Patton. If you have not had an opportunity to listen to Michael's interview captured on the video by the Young and Emerging volunteers, Young and Emerging evaluators who volunteered to film interviews for this conference, I highly recommend it. He starts off describing himself as a dinosaur generalist in the field of evaluation. I think a lot of us know Michael Quinn Patton. He's got over 50 years in the field of evaluation, and I'm not going to try to attempt to summarize his accomplishments as with the other people on this panel. But suffice to say, I believe we're very lucky to have such a charismatic thought leader raising the urgency of the times through his Blue Marble Evaluation Network and an array of other initiatives that Michael's working on. So I will turn it over to Michael Quinn Patton.
Thank you, Scott, and everyone. In the context of climate change and the issues that we've been facing as challenges, I want to add another dimension to this that I've been working on in the last year. The issues of food and agriculture, the food systems that are related to and affected by climate change and by the pandemic. In July of this year, the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World UN report came out, which documented the ways in which hunger is increasing in the world. David Beasley, the executive director of the World Food Program, a month ago in a major presentation said that a child is dying of starvation every 5 seconds. Every 5 seconds. The report estimates that between 720 and 811 million people in the world faced hunger in 2020, and that those numbers are increasing dramatically. That close to 10% of the world's population is severely facing food insecurity, and that the major drivers of food insecurity and nutrition are conflict, climate variability and extremes, economic slowdowns and downturns, now all exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic. And that the numbers are getting increasingly dire in the current situation. In September 23rd, the UN will host a World Food Systems Summit addressing many of these issues. And I've been involved in preparing for that summit by analyzing some 850 dialogues that have gone on around the world in preparation for the summit. But the first point I want to take away from this for evaluation is when we see the widespread effects of COVID, the widespread effects of hunger in the world, and of climate, it raises an important question that I find is virtually always ignored in the theories of change that I see in logic models, in program designs. Our program interventions tend to assume that people are healthy and nourished. People who are sick and hungry cannot take advantage of programs. We know that school children who are hungry cannot do well in school. And so, as a part of context for establishing what's going on in situations where interventions are taking place, part of the evaluation context, I'm suggesting, needs to include the ways in which a population that a program is targeted to is actually able physiologically to participate. Over time, we've found that the ravages of HIV/AIDS have seriously affected agricultural productivity because sick farmers living with AIDS and struggling with HIV aren't able to be productive. They're fatigued. They're more susceptible to COVID. And therefore, because they're not as productive, they and their families are more susceptible to hunger. The assumptions that underlie most theories of change is that the programs that are targeted to people that they will be able to participate in, and we have to look at the extent to which major factors in the ineffectiveness of programs is that the people targeted are sick, are hungry, are oppressed, are afraid, lack good housing, lack good sanitation, and that climate change is exacerbating all of these issues, which is going to affect program effectiveness of all kinds. So I've put in the chat a link to a major report that came out today that I and colleagues in the Blue Marble Evaluation Network have done to summarize the 850 dialogues that have gone on over the last year in preparation for the World Food Summit that will occur on September 23rd. That report presents a theory of transformation based upon those dialogues. And so if you want to see how you go from a qualitative analysis of identifying a set of themes into formulating a theory of transformation, that report will give you a sense of that. And so my point is to have us look at the ways in which what's going on with climate are connected to COVID, food, the infodemic, which is misinformation, one of the key things in the Mentimeter that came up, in equity, that these issues are interconnected and that the capacity of programs to target any given outcomes will be affected by the conditions of people in communities, individual people, regions, by these factors. The effectiveness of all kinds of policies and programs are cast in doubt because of the severe suffering of populations that they are targeted to. And we need to do a better job of establishing these contextual conditions, taking them into account, including that in our baseline data to understand the ways in which interventions are affected by the larger context that we've been talking about throughout this session. I'll stop there.
Terrific. Thank you, Michael. Very, very relevant. I think some people might have had some difficulty seeing some of your presentation. I tried to reassure them because a lot of your presentation had stopped on the slide showing the fishing boats, so they weren't missing a whole lot of content there. But one thing that you might want to do, Michael, is the email link, not the email, the website in your last slide, the website address. Maybe if you can put that in the chat, that would be appreciated. Okay, very good. So we are opening things up now to the panel to have a conversation among themselves for us to hear. And before we do that, though, let me see. We have some Mentimeter questions. Let us first open it up to the panel because Michael was just talking. I don't know if he's ready to feed us a Mentimeter question yet. Michael, how are you doing on your end?
Do you want me to pull up the Mentimeter?
Yeah, I think because we're a little overtime and it's we've got about 25 minutes left, maybe we can all go to the second Mentimeter question. Okay, and this question, as you can see, is to what extent are the challenges being illuminated here relevant to your own evaluation network? Now, I realize some people might not necessarily have the Mentimeter link still showing. I'm going to...
It's on the screen, menti.com.
Okay.
The code is at the
there
top
it
of
is.
the...
Right at the top. Thank you, Michael. And the code's up there too. Okay. Now we've got over 40 people, and we've got about almost 15 people that have responded. While people are responding on this, I would like to pose the first question for the panel, and that is, how do you connect the global challenges we've been discussing to your own local context, to your own evaluation practice and approach? And I think maybe if we go in the same order that people presented, Joe, I'll give you the talking stick, and I'll just remind that we'd like responses to try to be under a minute, please.
Thanks, Scott. So, I mean, my local context is the global context because that's where we are working, right? But we're trying to bridge the difference between local and global. And I think the key things that both Zender, well, actually everyone, you had talked about transboundary impacts. He also talked about cost effectiveness. Zender spoke about bringing in other contexts and other disciplines, also talked about thinking out of the box with different sorts of learning that we are doing in terms of our toolbox. Serge spoke about the fact that we have to be looking at different populations and transference of context. All of these things are really relevant to, in the context that I'm currently working in, which is, well, investment decisions. And investment decisions have to consider not just what is cost benefit and cost effective currently. And one of my pushes within IFAD is to really think beyond, is for us to think far beyond what can be measured in terms of, these metrics, and to really think about, well, what is the overall longer term intangible, unmeasurable benefits that we can get. I mean, the Dasgupta review, for example, on nature-based solutions and biodiversity that came out in the middle of the year highlighted this hugely. And the problem is that most organizations, such as IFAD, such as all of our organizations, are slow to adopt a lot of these things into their own decision making. So, for example, the Partha Dasgupta review, which was on nature-based solutions and biodiversity, spoke about, well, we've got to consider externalities and we've got to consider the cost of the resource in our economic and financial analysis. Right? An evaluation team would definitely say that. And if I were wearing that, obviously that's my first recommendation. The problem is that of methodology, when I speak to the economists who are sitting within IFAD, helping us to think about, well, where should we target these investments? The challenge is that they don't know how to do this. And so I think as an evaluation community, we've really got to push that, right? And unless we don't demand it, unless we as an evaluation community don't ask for that bar to be raised, it's not going to be raised. But it's really important that we keep pushing patiently and persistently. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen. Okay, next, Juha. Again, the question's in the chat. How do you connect the global challenges we've been discussing to your own local context and your personal practice and approach?
Right. So I have partially the same answer as Joe, is that my context is also the global context, because we're the global environment facility, but obviously all the projects and programs that we do and that we evaluate work at the country level, and they work at the local level. We are by definition focusing on the environmental issue, so we come from that angle, and our challenge is more on how do we really convince the country partners actually and other partners that we work with on the importance of mainstreaming the environmental considerations into programming, and evaluation can play an important role in that. So our major challenge that we are now talking about is how do we, coming from the environmental angle, how do we promote policy coherence in that sense, that that we are not, that the GEF is not coming to a country to try to repair the damage that other sectoral policies have been doing, let's say agriculture or forestry or infrastructure or economic policies in more general. So that's our angle to this issue in many ways. And I think that one of the important things is what Serge-Erik was also saying, is that the context is always very different in different places, and more than half of the GEF programs and projects are working also in situations that are affected by conflict and fragility. So, and natural resources management is a very important part there. So bringing that in is important. Of course, my final point I'd like to say so I'm in a very, very, very lucky position as an evaluator, is that I head an evaluation function that is independent. I have my independent budget. My work program is approved by the governing council, and so basically there's nobody coming to tell me saying that you can't look at that, and so we can set the evaluation agenda pretty much the way we want to do it.
Thank you, Juha. All right, moving along here. Zenda.
Yes, I also work primarily global level, but also sometimes local to global. And 3 quick points. Number one, I'm starting to work with global networks, one in particular that is trying to transform the seafood system to be more sustainable. And some other ones that are also focused on developing new economic models away from the extreme capitalism that we have. And in their cases, what we are starting to do, but only now starting to do, is take a 3 horizons future-orientated exercise, couple that to a transformation theory of change or a theory of transformation developed by people who are engaged in this, and then linking developmental evaluation and or principles-focused evaluation within the framing of memorable evaluation to that. So in different ways trying to combine these available methodologies that we have. That works in the beginning. Second point, I'm doing an evaluation of China's efforts over the last 12 years in climate, in adjusting policy and action to climate, and I'm doing it on behalf of a philanthropy, and we are engaging with, because the philanthropies work in tandem, and where that is very, very helpful is to understand very, very well the major difference in strategy that one needs when you work with China, anyone in China, from the government to the NGOs, very different ways of convincing people. You do not confront them. Bullying doesn't work. It doesn't work in Asia. It just doesn't. And confronting people, the societies there are far more focused on compromise. They don't see things in black and white. They see it in shades of grey. And so when one wants to enable transformative change, which has been taking place in China, in areas like the use of like pollution and others, it is very interesting to delve into exactly why the transformational efforts were successful, or perhaps not. And then finally, I always say that the most useful question that I ever ask in all my evaluations is the question why. For those who don't work with transformation or drastic change per se, and you don't have the resources or the time to figure out whether there's some signals of transformation here. What is very, very useful is to try to figure out what are the influences on a particular situation, either through the intervention before or after. And it comes back to Michael's point of health and so on. What the question of deepening, using the question why, deepening understanding simply in any evaluation already gives you a very, very good idea of what are the influences that are playing out on what is happening or what is being done. And that then enables one to understand the system, the connections to different systems that you are either addressing through what you do, or that you are failing to, not you as evaluator, but what others are trying to affect, and whether they're successful or not. So the question why is the simplest way to start building this kind of thinking into what is being done, and understand the systems that one is trying to affect, and whether you're successful or not.
Okay, thank you, Zenda. So our 1 minute responses to the question, and I don't mean not just Zenda, but everybody's been going a little bit over. We're already at 4:08, and the session needs to end at 4:20. So I'm going to turn it over to Serge and then Michael. I also want to flag that there's an interesting question in the margins from Lars that people who are not talking might want to respond to. But without further ado, Serge, and please try to keep it as much as possible to a minute.
Thanks, Scott. As usual, you know, one of the assets of my work is like I don't know how to talk too much, and then sometimes try to bring things simply. It's not easy. But briefly, I want to bring an example to from my works. You know, as you have said, I'm so proud to be in my positions as external viewers, external evaluators. This gives me a very biggest rooms of influence, the biggest rooms to bring back my clients on the quick targets. Example, 2 years ago, I was called to lead an evaluations in South Sudan. The evaluation was dealing with women's support to mainstreaming women capacity, and then support their economic capacity, and also simply said support their resilience approach. But my clients was asking me to say, I want to see in these evaluations 50% of men, 50% of women for your target, for your sample. Whoa. I thought to my clients, this is the context of the country, South Sudan. The project was targeted mostly women groups, about 90%. The project was focused about gender policy of the country. The project is being managed in the Muslim country, where they have traditional customs in place. The project is being implemented for the 5 years in a country where these are how they enable environment of the project. So I can't find a better methodology to get 50% of men, 50% of women. It's not aligned and also be coherent with your interventions. It's not going to be also aligned with the lesson learned I'm going to bring in my evaluation. And then most importantly, for my own careers, it's not going to enlarge my feasibility as evaluators. This is my proposal. And if we go through to my proposal, we was focused on the context of the project instead of bringing something aside. Yes, another question from Lars. I like this question a lot. Most of times, clients refuse to focus the evaluation by using the evaluation matrix. Yes, lies. Maybe I may be wrong. I mean, I won't pronounce your name very well, but because most of the last part of the question about how can we concretely provide answer to an evaluations. I always talk to my clients, when we keep away the evaluation matrix when conducting an evaluation, we are pretty sure about 70% at least to be aware about the evidence we are looking to the evaluation. Because with the evaluation matrix, we have the overall design of the evaluation with the tool or all methodology we are going to use in the evaluation. So when you draft a very well and very easy evaluation matrix, you are pretty sure that you are going to respond to the key question to your clients. Yeah, Scott, over to you.
Thank you, Sir Jarek. Well, actually, it's over to Michael. Michael, I'm going to give you the talking stick, and then maybe you can run us out, Michael, because you got the controls for Mentimeter. We might want to ask just one of the last two Mentimeter questions, but I'll let you decide that when we get there. Michael?
It's the Mentimeter question is already up, so people can go to it. I'll pull it up, the answers here in a moment, but the final question is already there. So if you go back to Mentimeter and put in the code, you'll see the question about what are the barriers that evaluation needs to overcome. Let me respond to both the overall question and to Lars' concern, and that is to say to reiterate what Scott said in his opening, that when we're dealing with clients and funders and commissioners of evaluation and what to include and how to address these issues, we don't need to do it alone. It's not a matter simply of our each individual personal opinion that sustainability and equity ought to be universal criteria in evaluation. So that the way I deal with my clients and across the board, I work with a broad range of clients at different levels, is to have them know that the International Development Evaluation Association and our professional associations have together adopted the standard that all evaluations should address sustainability and equity. You don't have to make that position on your own. What you're able to say to funders and commissioners of evaluation, this is now the standard of the field. This is not my personal opinion that you ought to do this. The field, the profession of evaluation, has together issued a mandate that all evaluations should address sustainability and equity. Bring that to the attention of the people who you're working with. You don't have to stake yourself out there to do that. So let's see what folks are saying. You can challenges, relevant capacity as a challenge, maintain independence, funding, infodemic. You can add other issues, but I think that part of what we need to do is be able to communicate as a profession that we have taken these positions in dealing with the challenge of our time. Scott?
Thank you, Michael. Very good. And thank you for also responding to some of the questions that came up in chat. I just want to, if I may, and let me see if I can. Yeah, let's see here. Share my screen, just because this is a visual that was on, can people see my screen? Michael, I can see you. Give a thumbs up if you can see it. Yes. Great. This was a visual this morning from, sorry, it has my notes, and you can see the document recovery on the left. I've been having a nightmare time here with my computer crashing. But I thought this was a simple, intuitive graph. And how do we turn the volume of the bad stuff down and amplify the good stuff? Now, this was presented by the keynote speaker, Hans Breitnevik, I can't pronounce that, the executive director of the European Environmental Agency this morning. And he was talking about, the world, fossil fuels, stuff like this. I took a look at this diagram and I said, how can we transform evaluation so it can be more transformative or be more capable to support transformational change in society that we need. And I think in evaluation, we have some of that red stuff going on, where we have some practices and bad habits that really confine some of the changes that we need in the field of evaluation. And then there's some good stuff that's coming out as well. And I'll just throw this back to the panel or anybody that wants to write in the chat. How can we get more of that green stuff happening within the field of evaluation? I think it's arrogant for evaluation to think that we're going to transform the world. And that's very much a silo mentality. But we can help nudge it and leverage it with other people in the world. But I think to do so, we need to broaden our approaches. So I'll just stop sharing and throw that back to folks if they'd like to comment. Okay, I see in the comment there, Christine is agreeing with Michael that we need to add criteria when we're writing proposals. Very good. I've encountered that in doing an assessment of an M&E system in the UN system, in the UN agency, where their definition of sustainability, I felt, was too much, as Michael points out, focused on continuity versus looking at the larger impact on the human and natural systems. Michael has just put up our next question for Mentimeter that you can maybe go to, and let's see what people think to how barriers, what barriers does evaluation need to overcome? Let me see here. To be relevant to challenges.
And let me take you back. That's where we started out.
Okay, I don't know if you're still sharing your screen, Michael.
I'm not.
Okay.
We're out of time, so I stopped sharing. Okay. But what I was showing was the word cloud that we started out with. Here's where we started.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the issues we've been dealing with. Are you seeing that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we are. Yes, I am.
And so the people found it relevant, and barriers were leadership, using existing standards and ethical guidelines, the silos, the infodemic, finding funding, maintaining independence, developing relevant capacity. All of these things that panelists addressed along the way, including clients who share these ideas, fundamentalist views on social justice.
Great. So thank you. We are.
Thank you, Scott, for organizing the session.
Well, it's a pleasure having all five of you here. I do want to share with the group that we also had plans to have Melanie Good. I'm spacing Good. Help me out, Michael. Melanie Goodfield.
I'm not going to come up with it.
Melanie Goodfield join us.
Good child. Good child. Good child.
Good child. Thank
Good
you.
child.
And she has a website. She was unable to join us at the last moment, but she's a North American indigenous thought leader in this area, and she has a website called The Turtle. Let me see if I can get it. Turtle Island Institute. And I'm going to put it in chat right now. I encourage people to take a look at that as well. And of course, there's a lot of other resources out there from the Blue Marble Evaluation website, which you can find a webinar with Melanie speaking on there. And Better Evaluation has its footprint evaluation. And as I mentioned earlier, Zenda's website. So I just want to try to leave people on that positive note that there are a lot of people working in this area. And as Zenda underscored, what I got from her presentation is the importance of inclusiveness, thinking outside of the box of just the field of evaluation and looking at transdisciplinary sources of knowledge and so forth. So I'd like to thank everybody. First, the panelists. I'd like to thank the EES and our volunteer as well, who has been here to help shepherd us along with some of our technical glitches. And I'd like to thank the audience. And knowing that this is being recorded and this is the type of event where people go back and watch things at a later point that they haven't, I'd also like to thank the future audience of this session. So thanks to everybody.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you,
all.
Scott, very much. Really
Bye-bye.
appreciate it.
Well done.
Thank you.